in the midst of America's darkest chapter. When the nation was torn apart by civil war and moral conflict, a single document promised a new dawn. On January 1, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, a bold declaration that proclaimed freedom for all enslaved people in the Confederate States. It was a moment that would redefine the meaning of liberty itself. But in truth, freedom did not arrive overnight. Across the South, the echoes of chains still lingered, and countless men, women, and children continued to labor under the cruel illusion that nothing had changed. In the far reaches of Texas, news of Lincoln's proclamation was deliberately suppressed. Slaveholders feared losing their power, and Confederate loyalists sought to preserve the old order as long as possible. Texas, isolated and distant from the major battlefronts, became a final refuge for those who refused to accept that slavery was over. It was a place where freedom had been declared but not yet delivered. Imagine the cruel irony. 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, thousands of enslaved people in Texas were still working the cotton fields, still praying for a freedom they did not know had already been promised to them. The war was over. Lincoln had been assassinated. And yet the last enslaved Americans were still waiting to hear the words that would change their lives forever. Then, on a warm June morning in 1865, everything changed. Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, with federal troops and a message that would finally pierce through the silence of oppression. Standing before the people, he read aloud General Order No. 3. All slaves are free. The words rolled through the air like thunder, shattering centuries of bondage. Tears, disbelief, and joy erupted as people realized that freedom long delayed had finally come. That day, June 19th, became known as Juneteenth, a fusion of June and 19th. It marked not just the liberation of Texas enslaved people, but the fulfillment of a promise that had been made to all Americans. It was the day when the final chains of slavery were broken, and the idea of freedom became a shared reality, not just a distant dream. Juneteenth was not merely a celebration, it was a rebirth. It was a moment of joy, reflection, and hope, and it continues to remind us that freedom, no matter how delayed, is worth the wait. If you believe that history matters, if you think these stories of struggle and triumph should never be forgotten, then make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications. Together, we will keep uncovering the powerful moments that shaped our world and continue to inspire generations to come. Even after President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation rang out across the nation, declaring that all enslaved people in the Confederate States were free, the reality on the ground was far more complicated, far more tragic, and far more delayed than the words on paper suggested. In many corners of the South, news traveled slowly, and resistance to change ran deep. But nowhere was this more pronounced than in Texas, a vast expanse of land stretching to the horizon, where the whispers of freedom struggled to reach fields still heavy with the labor of those bound by centuries of bondage. Texas was, in every sense, isolated. Its distance from the eastern battlefronts and major population centers made it a kind of hidden world, where the structures of slavery could linger long after they had been dismantled elsewhere. Union forces were few, scattered, and overstretched, unable to enforce the proclamations issued in Washington. And the Confederate loyalists who remained there were determined to maintain control over the lives of those they had enslaved. In this remote and sprawling state, life for the enslaved continued much as it had for generations, with the sun rising over cotton fields and sugarcane plantations where men and women toiled from dawn until dusk, their labor the backbone of a system that had persisted for centuries. Families were torn apart, traditions were suppressed, and the promise of liberty existed only as a distant, almost mythical hope whispered quietly among those who dared to imagine a life beyond chains. The geographical isolation of Texas was more than just miles of land. It was a psychological barrier, a space where fear and control could flourish undisturbed. Even as the Civil War came to its bloody conclusion and the Confederate armies surrendered, this physical and social remoteness meant that freedom had to wait, that the words of the Emancipation Proclamation could not immediately penetrate the fortress of denial built by those unwilling to relinquish power. For 2 long years, the people of Texas remained in this suspended state of bondage, caught between the promise of freedom and the stubborn reality of their daily lives. During this time, the enslaved communities maintained their resilience, holding on to traditions, faith, and the quiet hope that liberation would eventually arrive. They nurtured stories, songs, and prayers that spoke of a life beyond the chains, of a future where children could grow up with the possibility of choice and dignity. Yet, the frustration of waiting, the tension of living under the shadow of delayed justice, created an atmosphere of anxious anticipation. News from the outside world arrived slowly and inconsistently, carried by travelers, letters, and the occasional wandering Union sympathizer. Each piece of information a fragile, connecting the isolated people to the larger promise of emancipation. The arrival of General Gordon Granger in Galveston on June 19, 1860, did more than just announce freedom. It dissolved the invisible walls of isolation that had held Texas' enslaved population in suspended bondage. Standing in a city still echoing with the uncertainty of war, Granger read aloud General Order No. 3, declaring that all enslaved people were free. The moment was electric, a tidal wave of relief and disbelief sweeping through communities that had endured the impossible wait for justice. For those who had labored under the sun, for those whose families had been separated and whose lives had been constrained by fear and oppression. The words themselves were transformative. They were the beginning of a new era, a turning point where freedom was no longer theoretical but immediate, tangible, and irreversible. As the announcement spread beyond Galveston, the effects rippled through Texas, reaching plantations and settlements that had for too long existed outside the reach of law and liberty. The news inspired celebrations, tears, prayers, and communal gatherings, as individuals and families grasped the enormity of what had finally arrived. Juneteenth, born from that day, became a living symbol of resilience, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who survived the wait for justice and the oppressive systems that sought to deny them their humanity. The prolonged delay of freedom in Texas underscores the uneven and complicated path of emancipation in America. It highlights how geography, politics, and human resistance can intersect to prolong injustice, even in the presence of laws meant to dismantle it. Yet it also illustrates the extraordinary courage, hope, and perseverance of those who refused to surrender to despair, who maintained their dignity in the face of extended oppression, and who would ultimately transform a moment of delayed justice into a powerful celebration of freedom that resonates to this day. By the time Juneteenth became a recognized and celebrated event, it carried with it not just the memory of liberation, but the weight of the long wait that preceded it. It reminds us that freedom is not always immediate, that the journey to justice can be uneven and prolonged, and that the human spirit, when nurtured by hope and resilience, can endure even the most extraordinary delays. In Texas, the physical remoteness of the land mirrored the temporal delay of liberty, creating a story of delayed justice that would ultimately inspire generations to recognize, honor, and fight for the enduring promise of freedom. By the time June of 1865 arrived, the people of Texas had endured more than 2 years of waiting, lingering in the shadow of a freedom that had been promised but never delivered. Across the sprawling plantations and scattered settlements, the daily rhythm of life remained dictated by the demands of labor, the weight of surveillance, and the constant fear that any hope of liberty could be extinguished at the whim of a landowner. Families were still torn apart, dreams deferred, and the simple dignity of choice remained a distant fantasy. The Emancipation Proclamation had been written, spoken, and celebrated elsewhere, but here, in Texas, it had been little more than words on paper, invisible against the backdrop of continued oppression. The stage was set for a moment that would finally bridge the gap between promise and reality, and it arrived in the form of Union General Gordon Granger and his contingent of federal troops. On June 19, 1860, Granger arrived in Galveston, a bustling port city that had long been a hub of commerce and the occasional center of resistance. His presence alone was significant, a tangible manifestation of the Union's authority finally reaching a region that had, until now, existed in near isolation from the enforcement of emancipation. Granger carried with him not only soldiers, but a message that would shatter the illusions of continued subjugation. Standing in the public square, he read General Order No. 3, a formal declaration that all enslaved people in Texas were free, and that the people should take the necessary steps to inform themselves of their new status and claim the rights that now belonged to them. The words resonated across the city and beyond, echoing in the hearts of those who had endured years of uncertainty and waiting. The announcement was more than a statement of law. It was a profound cultural and psychological moment, the culmination of hope, patience, and resilience. For those who had spent their lives bound in labor, listening to songs of freedom, and dreaming of emancipation, the words of General Granger transformed abstract promise into lived reality. Families who had been separated by the harsh demands of slavery found themselves able to reunite. Children who had never known liberty now had a tangible path toward it. And communities could begin to envision futures shaped not by fear and coercion but by self-determination and dignity. The liberation declared that day rippled far beyond Galveston, as word spread along the riverbanks, across plantations, and into the remote reaches of the Texas countryside, reaching people who had been isolated not only by geography but by the rigid social and economic structures designed to suppress them. The immediate response to Granger's announcement was a mixture of awe, disbelief, and elation. Many had been skeptical, conditioned by years of oppression to question whether the promise of freedom could ever truly materialize. Others embraced the news with tears and laughter, singing and dancing in spontaneous displays of joy, marking the first day of true autonomy in their lives. Juneteenth, the term that would come to define this historic occasion, emerged organically from this combination of date and celebration, a cultural marker that fused the reality of liberation with the collective memory of endurance. It was a holiday born of resilience, a testament to the strength of those who had survived injustice and the resolve of a community that refused to let delayed freedom be denied. General Granger's arrival and the reading of General Order No. 3 also marked a turning point in the broader narrative of emancipation. The symbolic and practical enforcement of the law demonstrated that federal authority could reach even the most remote and resistant regions, that the promise of liberty was not contingent on geography, and that justice, though delayed, could eventually be delivered. The act itself reinforced the notion that freedom was not merely a document or proclamation, but an actionable reality that required presence, enforcement, and recognition. In this way, the events of that day in Galveston bridged the gap between legislation and lived experience, transforming a legal decree into a tangible, life-altering truth, as the people of Texas began to process the enormity of their new reality. Celebrations continued, combining solemn reflection with communal joy. Churches, homes, and public squares became centers of gathering where stories were shared, songs were sung, and rituals of liberation were enacted. The day did not merely mark the absence of slavery. It celebrated the presence of possibility, the beginning of self-determined lives, and the creation of a cultural identity rooted in freedom. across Texas. The seeds of Juneteenth ceremonies were sown, ceremonies that would continue to evolve over decades, carrying forward the memory of endurance, the significance of delayed justice, and the triumph of human resilience. General Granger's arrival and the reading of General Gordon No. 3 remain a pivotal moment not just in Texan history but in the broader story of America. It underscores the complexity of liberation, the uneven path toward justice, and the necessity of tangible action in transforming promises into reality. Through the voices of those who experienced it firsthand, through the celebrations that began on that summer day, and through the legacy that continues to inspire generations, the story of Juneteenth stands as a testament to the enduring human desire for freedom, the strength found in patience and hope, and the ultimate triumph of justice over delay. As the words of General Gordon No. 3 spread across Galveston and into the farthest reaches of Texas, a profound transformation began to unfold, one that transcended legal documentation and reached deep into the hearts of those who had endured the unimaginable weight of bondage. The news traveled like wildfire, carried by word of mouth, travelers returning home, and the instinctive desire of communities to share life-altering information. Families who had been torn apart by generations of slavery reunited with tears, embraces, and quiet relief, while those who had spent their lives in servitude began to imagine, for the first time, a life shaped by their own choices. The moment was not just an announcement. It was a seismic shift in the very fabric of society, a recognition that the promise of freedom was no longer theoretical but immediate, tangible, and unstoppable. In the aftermath of the proclamation, celebration erupted organically, merging joy, reflection, and communal identity into a vibrant tapestry of cultural expression. People gathered in churches, town squares, and open fields, their voices lifted in songs that had survived years of oppression, hymns that spoke of hope and deliverance, and spirituals that carried the weight of history while pointing toward a brighter future. Prayers were offered, not only in gratitude for the arrival of freedom, but as a solemn acknowledgement of the struggles that had led to that moment, the generations of resilience that had paved the way, and the responsibilities that freedom now demanded. Elders shared stories with the young, recounting the hardships endured, the clever acts of resistance, and the quiet courage that had sustained communities even under the harshest conditions. These gatherings were not simply celebratory. They were acts of cultural preservation, affirmation, and continuity, binding generations together through shared memory and renewed purpose. The creation of Juneteenth, the term born from the date of this transformative day, June 19th, represented more than a simple marker on the calendar. It became a symbolic bridge between the past and the future, connecting the collective memory of suffering with the tangible reality of liberation. Through food, music, storytelling, and ritual, the newly freed communities carved out a space in which they could assert agency over their lives, reclaim their humanity, and nurture a shared cultural identity. The celebrations blended solemnity with joy, reflecting both the gravity of centuries of oppression and the elation of finally stepping into a world where one could move freely, make choices independently, and envision possibilities unshackled by fear or coercion. In the fields and streets, the sense of liberation was palpable. Children, who had never known the full scope of freedom, played in ways previously denied, their laughter filling the air as a testament to the transformative power of autonomy. Adults, who had labored from dawn until dusk, suddenly found the opportunity to determine the rhythm of their own lives, to reconnect with family and community, and to establish the foundations of a future no longer constrained by the chains of servitude. Every song, every prayer spoken, every shared meal became an affirmation of identity, a celebration of endurance, and a tangible declaration that freedom, though long delayed, had arrived. The communal gatherings of Juneteenth were also deeply educational, transmitting lessons about history, resilience, and the moral imperative of justice to succeeding generations. Elders imparted wisdom about survival, negotiation, and solidarity, recounting not only acts of courage but also the strategies employed to preserve dignity and maintain hope in the face of oppression. These narratives became woven into the cultural fabric of the community, ensuring that freedom would not be treated lightly or taken for granted. Each celebration reinforced the importance of remembering both the struggles and triumphs that led to liberation, anchoring collective identity in the hard-won reality of emancipation. Music and storytelling played particularly vital roles in this process, serving as vessels for memory and instruments of continuity. Spirituals and folk songs, which had carried encoded messages of hope and resistance during the years of slavery, now became anthems of celebration, their lyrics echoing in open fields, churches, and communal gatherings. The act of singing together transformed isolated voices into a chorus of shared experience, connecting the past and present while projecting aspirations for the future. Storytelling, too, functioned as a binding agent, teaching younger generations about both the injustices endured and the strategies of resilience that allowed communities to survive and thrive. In these ways, the cultural practices associated with Juneteenth were far more than entertainment. They were acts of remembrance, resistance, and affirmation of identity. As Juneteenth celebrations expanded across Texas and eventually spread to other parts of the United States, they retained their dual character, a joyful affirmation of freedom and a solemn remembrance of the journey that had made that freedom possible. They became spaces in which African American communities could assert agency, celebrate cultural heritage, and reflect on the long arc of justice that had finally, however belatedly, reached them. The legacy of these celebrations is profound, demonstrating the capacity of human beings to transform delayed justice into a sustained, generational expression of identity, hope, and resilience. Ultimately, the communal rejoicing, prayers, songs, and shared experiences that marked the first Juneteenth were far more than a moment of celebration. They were the beginning of a living tradition that continues to embody the triumph of human spirit over oppression. The day became both a historical marker and a continuing reminder that freedom, when it arrives, is to be cherished, celebrated, and passed forward, carrying the stories, struggles, and hopes of generations into the future. It is a tradition rooted in resilience, a testament to the power of collective memory, and an enduring affirmation that liberation, though delayed, can transform lives and communities in ways that resonate far beyond the moment itself. As the first celebrations of Juneteenth unfolded across Texas, what had begun as an immediate response to the announcement of freedom gradually took on a far deeper significance, growing beyond the joy of liberation into a profound cultural and spiritual identity that would endure for generations. In the weeks and months following June 19, 1860, the gatherings that celebrated emancipation were infused with meaning, as African American communities sought not only to mark the end of slavery but to reclaim and redefine themselves in a society that had long sought to suppress their voices, histories, and humanity. These celebrations became a living testament to resilience, a declaration that, despite centuries of oppression, African Americans could create spaces of joy, reflection, and cultural continuity that honored both their past and their future. The spiritual dimension of Juneteenth was immediate and unmistakable. Freed people turned to their faith to articulate a sense of wonder and gratitude that transcended words, offering prayers of thanksgiving for survival, endurance, and the dawning of a new life. Churches, which had long served as centers of community organization and refuge, became the epicenters of Juneteenth observances, where hymns and spiritual songs carried messages of liberation, hope, and collective memory. The melodies themselves were deeply symbolic, connecting present joy with the suffering and perseverance of ancestors, transforming music into both celebration and education. Every note sung was an affirmation of identity, a bridge between generations, and a declaration that the trials of the past had not erased the dignity or humanity of those who had endured them. Beyond spirituality, Juneteenth evolved as a cultural phenomenon, a repository of traditions and customs that celebrated African American resilience and ingenuity. Families gathered to share meals, pass down oral histories, and enact rituals that reinforced communal bonds. Foods prepared during these celebrations were more than nourishment. They were symbolic acts linking participants to heritage, memory, and survival strategies handed down through generations. Storytelling flourished as elders recounted tales of perseverance, resistance, and hope, embedding lessons about strength, solidarity, and moral courage into the consciousness of younger generations. In this way, Juneteenth celebrations were not only commemorative but also instructive, teaching lessons about endurance, justice, and identity while honoring those who had endured the unimaginable. As the holiday grew, Juneteenth became a marker of collective consciousness, a means of asserting presence in a society that had systematically sought to erase African American contributions and experiences. It functioned as a cultural anchor, reminding communities of both the victories and the ongoing struggles for equality, and providing a shared framework through which freedom could be celebrated while consciousness of historical injustice remained alive. Public events, parades, and festivals emerged as forums for affirmation, creating opportunities for communities to celebrate achievements, reinforce values, and cultivate pride in a shared heritage. These expressions of identity were particularly significant in the decades following emancipation, as African Americans navigated the complex social, political, and economic challenges of Reconstruction and Jim Crow, finding in Juneteenth a resilient thread of continuity and hope. Juneteenth's spiritual and cultural significance also extended into the realm of social cohesion and solidarity. In celebrating their collective liberation, African Americans forged networks of mutual support, reinforcing communal bonds that had been strained by centuries of forced separation and oppression. The holiday became a space where stories could be shared openly, where grief and joy coexisted, and where the values of courage, perseverance, and self-determination were enacted through both ritual and everyday practice. It was a living lesson in resilience, demonstrating that freedom, while a legal condition, was also a social and cultural reality that had to be actively nurtured and defended. Over time, Juneteenth transcended its immediate geographic origins, spreading from Texas to African American communities across the United States, carried by those who migrated in search of work, opportunity, and safety. Each new community adapted the traditions, blending local customs with the core elements of remembrance, celebration, and cultural affirmation. In doing, Juneteenth became a unifying force, a symbol of continuity and identity that connected African Americans across regions, generations, and circumstances. The holiday offered a shared language of liberation, a common framework for celebrating achievement, resilience, and survival while honoring the collective memory of a people whose histories had too often been silenced or ignored. The enduring power of Juneteenth lies in its dual capacity to celebrate freedom and affirm identity. It reminds participants that liberation is not simply the absence of chains, but the presence of agency, dignity, and cultural self-determination. It demonstrates that resilience is not merely survival in the face of adversity, but the ability to transform suffering into meaning, community, and tradition. And it underscores that identity is not imposed by others but actively constructed, nurtured, and celebrated through shared memory, ritual, and expression. In the broader arc of American history, Juneteenth stands as a testament to the enduring human capacity to reclaim life and assert identity against the weight of oppression. It is both a reflection on the past and a living tradition, one that embodies the spiritual depth, cultural richness, and unyielding resilience of African American communities. Through prayers, songs, storytelling, and communal gatherings, Juneteenth continues to serve as a beacon of hope and a declaration of selfhood, reminding the world that freedom, when finally realized, carries with it the power to transform lives, communities, and the very fabric of society. It is a celebration not only of what was gained but of what endures, a living symbol of freedom, resilience, and the profound strength of identity. As the first Juneteenth celebrations took root in Texas, they were initially a deeply local affair, grounded in the immediate relief and joy of those who had endured the longest wait for freedom in the United States. Yet the significance of that day could not be contained within the borders of a single state. Formerly enslaved people, newly empowered by their liberty and eager to reunite with family or seek opportunities that had long been denied to them, began to move across the country, carrying with them the rituals, stories, and cultural practices that had emerged around the celebration of June 19th. With each journey, each relocation, the essence of Juneteenth, its songs, prayers, communal gatherings, and shared meals was transplanted into new communities, adapted to local conditions but always retaining the core spirit of resilience and liberation. This migration transformed what had been a regional observance into a living, evolving tradition that spanned the nation, allowing formerly enslaved people and their descendants to maintain a tangible connection to both their personal history and their collective past. As families resettled in new states, they brought with them more than just memories. They brought a framework for community, for cultural affirmation, and for the assertion of identity in a society that often sought to marginalize them. Juneteenth became a vehicle for continuity, a way to ensure that the experience of emancipation would not be forgotten even as people dispersed across urban centers, rural towns, and emerging industrial regions. In each new location, celebrations evolved to reflect local conditions and resources, yet they maintained the essential elements of commemoration: storytelling, music, prayer, and the sharing of food that honored both ancestral traditions and the new possibilities afforded by freedom. Elders served as cultural anchors, teaching younger generations the history of June 19th and instilling in them the importance of remembering the struggle that had led to their liberation, ensuring that the celebration remained a vital thread connecting past, present, and future. The spread of Juneteenth across the United States was also an act of cultural resilience and defiance. In a nation that had just emerged from the Civil War, African Americans faced systematic attempts to undermine their newly granted freedoms through black codes, segregation, and widespread discrimination. In this context, celebrating Juneteenth became both a joyful affirmation and a subtle act of resistance, a way for communities to assert their humanity and stake a claim to public space, memory, and identity. Parades, church services, family reunions, and public speeches became increasingly common, drawing people together in acts of collective remembrance and public celebration. Each gathering reinforced communal bonds, strengthened social networks, and provided a foundation for political, cultural, and social organization in a rapidly changing society. As Juneteenth traditions moved into northern cities and western territories, they adapted to new social environments. In industrial towns where African Americans had moved for employment, the celebrations often took the form of community picnics, block parties, and educational events designed to inform younger generations of the history of emancipation. In more rural segregated areas, observances centered around church services, storytelling, and shared meals that brought together extended families and neighbors, reaffirming the value of connection and community in a world that frequently sought to isolate and disenfranchise them. Even as the form of celebration shifted, the essence of Juneteenth, its emphasis on remembrance, resilience, and cultural pride remained consistent, illustrating the adaptability and enduring power of a tradition rooted in survival and liberation. Through this migration and transformation, Juneteenth became more than a commemoration of a single historical event. It became a national phenomenon, a symbol of the enduring human desire for freedom and the determination to preserve cultural identity against the forces of erasure. The holiday linked disparate African American communities, creating networks of shared memory and practice that transcended state lines. Economic status and generational divides. It became a way to educate, to unify, and to celebrate, turning the once local observance of June 19th into a collective affirmation of life, history, and agency. Over time, Juneteenth's reach and significance grew steadily, as African Americans continued to migrate during the Great Migration and beyond. The holiday followed, evolving in scale and visibility while remaining rooted in the principles that had given it birth: freedom, resilience, and cultural affirmation. Parades became more elaborate. Public speeches highlighted both historical and contemporary struggles for justice, and community festivals reinforced intergenerational bonds, ensuring that the lessons of emancipation and the triumph of human spirit were continually transmitted. Schools, churches, and civic organizations began to acknowledge and participate in observances, further embedding the holiday into the national consciousness and expanding its role as both a celebration and an educational instrument. By carrying Juneteenth traditions across state lines, formerly enslaved people created a living bridge between the local and the national, transforming personal liberation into a collective cultural phenomenon. The holiday became a vehicle for both remembering the hardships endured and celebrating the victories achieved, for honoring the sacrifices of those who had come before and inspiring those who would follow. In every new city and town, the legacy of Juneteenth was reshaped and renewed, demonstrating the enduring capacity of culture to survive, adapt, and inspire. The movement of these traditions across the country ensured that Juneteenth was no longer confined to a single day in a single state. It became a shared experience, a nationwide affirmation of freedom, and a powerful reminder of the resilience, creativity, and identity of African Americans throughout the United States. As the decades passed after the first Juneteenth celebrations in Texas, the holiday continued to evolve, not only as a commemoration of emancipation but also as a symbol of African American identity, resilience, and hope. While initially rooted in local gatherings, communal prayers, and storytelling, the holiday carried a deep cultural resonance that transcended geography and time, linking generations who had survived slavery with those who navigated the complexities of a society still struggling with racial inequality. By the mid-20th century, the United States had entered a new era of social and political upheaval, and the struggles for civil rights and equality cast Juneteenth in a renewed and profoundly symbolic light. It became more than a remembrance of liberation. It emerged as a cultural touchstone, a point of collective reflection, and a call to action for a society grappling with the promises and failures of its own ideals. During the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s, African Americans sought to dismantle segregation, challenge discriminatory laws, and assert their rights as full citizens. In this context, Juneteenth gained new relevance, bridging the historical struggle against slavery with the contemporary fight for justice and equality. Community leaders, activists, and ordinary citizens alike used the holiday as a means of educating younger generations about the long arc of liberation, emphasizing that freedom was never automatic and that every legal or social victory required vigilance, courage, and collective action. The holiday's emphasis on celebration, education, and cultural affirmation provided a unique space where history, memory, and activism converged. It became an annual reminder that the fight for freedom and equality did not end with the reading of General Order No. 3, but was an ongoing effort demanding awareness, engagement, and resilience. Juneteenth also provided a framework for African Americans to assert pride in their achievements, community, and heritage, even as systemic obstacles remained firmly in place. Church gatherings, parades, picnics, and public speeches during the holiday served as both a celebration and a teaching moment, reminding participants of the struggles that had been endured and the victories that had been won, while simultaneously inspiring them to continue the pursuit of justice. The holiday's rituals, whether through storytelling, music, or shared meals, were imbued with meaning, linking the personal experience of freedom to the broader narrative of collective liberation. In doing, Juneteenth offered both reflection and empowerment, transforming historical memory into a living, actionable guide for community cohesion and cultural pride. As the momentum of the civil rights movement carried forward, the recognition of Juneteenth by states and local governments began to increase. Across the United States, African American communities campaigned for official acknowledgement, striving to ensure that the day would be remembered not only within families and neighborhoods, but also in public spaces, schools, and government institutions. The push for formal recognition was itself a reflection of the holiday's deeper significance. It was a testament to the enduring power of history to shape identity, to inspire action, and to cultivate a shared understanding of justice, struggle, and resilience. By the late 20th century, Juneteenth had become a legally recognized holiday in many states, codifying its place in the national consciousness and providing an official platform for communities to celebrate, reflect, and educate. This period of formal recognition coincided with a broader reassessment of American history, particularly the narratives surrounding slavery, Reconstruction, and civil rights. Juneteenth emerged as a counter-narrative to histories that had often marginalized or erased African American contributions and struggles, offering instead a lens through which the resilience and achievements of African Americans could be fully appreciated and celebrated. The holiday's observance reinforced the idea that freedom, once delayed, could be honored through both remembrance and active engagement in shaping the present and future. By asserting Juneteenth publicly, communities not only celebrated liberation but also claimed agency over historical memory, ensuring that the stories of struggle, resilience, and hope were preserved and transmitted to subsequent generations. Through parades, educational programs, and cultural festivals, Juneteenth began to serve as a living classroom, teaching lessons about justice, perseverance, and civic engagement. The holiday became a space where history was not merely recited but experienced, where the acts of remembrance were imbued with energy and purpose, and where the communal bonds that had survived slavery were reinforced and renewed. Each celebration became a testament to the adaptability of tradition, demonstrating that a holiday born in the shadow of delayed freedom could evolve into a national symbol of identity, resilience, and hope. The recognition of Juneteenth in the late 20th century also reflected a growing awareness within American society of the importance of inclusive historical narratives. As schools, media, and cultural institutions began to acknowledge the holiday, Juneteenth became an opportunity to teach broader audiences about the history of slavery, emancipation, and the ongoing struggle for equality. The holiday's emphasis on cultural pride and community cohesion provided a counterbalance to narratives of oppression, highlighting the agency, creativity, and enduring spirit of African Americans. It reinforced the idea that liberation is not solely a legal or political milestone but also a cultural and social achievement, one that requires active commemoration, reflection, and celebration. Ultimately, the resurgence of Juneteenth during the Civil Rights Movement and its subsequent recognition by states in the late 20th century transformed it from a regional observance into a national symbol of African American resilience, pride, and historical consciousness. It became a day that connected the struggles of the past with the ongoing work of the present, providing a lens through which to view both progress and the challenges that remained. Through continued celebration, education, and public acknowledgement, Juneteenth solidified its role as a spiritual and cultural touchstone, a living reminder that freedom, though delayed, carries the power to inspire generations, reinforce identity, and galvanize collective action toward a more just and equitable society. Over a century and a half after that first transformative day in Galveston, Juneteenth has grown from a local celebration into a national symbol of freedom, resilience, and the enduring human spirit. On June 17, 2021, the United States formally recognized Juneteenth as a federal holiday, a moment that both commemorates the delayed liberation of enslaved African Americans in Texas and acknowledges the broader struggle for justice and equality that has defined the American story. This recognition is not just symbolic. It is a testament to the enduring importance of remembering history, honoring the sacrifices of those who came before, and ensuring that the lessons of the past inform the promises of the future. Juneteenth reminds us that freedom, even when long delayed, is a triumph worth celebrating, and that justice, though often imperfect, can ultimately prevail when people persist, resist, and demand it. The federal recognition of Juneteenth also underscores the cultural, spiritual, and social significance that the holiday has carried for generations. It affirms the value of collective memory and communal celebration, recognizing that the act of remembering is itself a form of liberation. The stories of struggle and perseverance embedded in Juneteenth serve as a bridge connecting past and present, showing us that liberty is not simply a legal designation but a lived experience, one that must be nurtured, defended, and shared. Through parades, educational programs, family gatherings, and communal reflections, Juneteenth provides an opportunity for all Americans to witness and honor the resilience of those who survived oppression and to celebrate the cultural identity that emerged from centuries of endurance. Juneteenth is also a reminder of the work that remains. While emancipation marked a monumental victory, the journey toward equality and justice has continued, shaped by movements, legislation, and countless individuals who have fought for civil rights, economic opportunity, and social recognition. The holiday encourages reflection on both progress and ongoing challenges, inspiring each generation to contribute to a society where liberty is not delayed, where rights are universally respected, and where all citizens can fully realize their potential. It is a call to remember that freedom is a continuous effort, requiring awareness, empathy, and action. Yet Juneteenth is not only about struggle, it is fundamentally a celebration of triumph, community, and shared humanity. From the first joyous gatherings in Texas, filled with songs, prayers, and communal meals, to today's nationwide celebrations, the holiday has always been an expression of hope, resilience, and cultural pride. It is a day to honor ancestors, to recognize the strength that carried them through unimaginable hardships, and to celebrate the achievements and contributions of African Americans to the nation. Through storytelling, music, food, and art, Juneteenth fosters a sense of belonging and identity, reminding us that history is alive not only in textbooks but in the voices, rituals, and practices of communities that have survived and thrived against tremendous odds. The federal acknowledgement of Juneteenth also opens the door for broader conversations about history, race, and justice in the United States. It invites people of all backgrounds to engage with the past, to understand the complexities of emancipation and civil rights, and to reflect on what it means to live in a society striving for equity and inclusion. By creating space for education and dialogue, the holiday encourages empathy, understanding, and action, emphasizing that freedom is most meaningful when it is shared and defended collectively. The celebration of Juneteenth nationally reinforces the idea that history matters, that remembrance can shape the present, and that honoring the struggles of those who came before can inspire a more just future. As we look back on the journey from that first announcement in Galveston to the recognition of Juneteenth as a federal holiday, we see a story that is both unique and universal. It is a story of resilience in the face of oppression, of hope sustained across generations, and of triumph delayed but ultimately realized. It reminds us that justice is not always immediate, that progress can be uneven, and that the human spirit is capable of enduring, celebrating, and transforming even the most difficult circumstances into a source of strength and cultural vitality. Juneteenth's significance extends beyond African American communities. It is a celebration for all Americans, an opportunity to reflect on the principles of freedom, equality, and justice that define the nation. It teaches lessons about perseverance, moral courage, and the importance of collective action, showing how ordinary people can contribute to extraordinary change. By embracing Juneteenth, we honor not only the historical moment of emancipation, but also the values it embodies: resilience, unity, and the ongoing pursuit of a more equitable society. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history and meaning of Juneteenth. If you found this story inspiring and meaningful, do not forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you can continue exploring the powerful moments in history that shaped our world and continue to influence our lives today. Your support helps us bring these stories to life and ensures that the legacy of freedom, resilience, and justice continues to be celebrated and remembered by future generations.